Our next panel, moderated by Ole Christian Schroder, who is the Director of Environmental Compliance of the Scorpio Group, one of the major shipping companies in the world, and a leader in international, in figuring out how the environmental programs that are now coming into focus around the world are going to affect the shipping industry. Includes Nick Makar, my colleague in the Marshall Islands Ship Registry, Semiramis Paliou, Director and Deputy Chief Executive of HELMEPA, the Hellenic Marine Environment Protection Association, an organization that I hold very dear to my heart. Constantine, or as we all know him, Charlie Papavizas, a partner in Winston and Strawn, a law firm in Washington, D.C. Nick Prokopuk, Business Development Manager of DNV GL, one of the world's leading classification societies, and David Morant, a Managing Director of Scorpio UK. Ole?
Good morning and thank you and welcome to the next panel. And in this panel, we will be discussing the present status of the regulatory bodies and the present status with that and how they interact and influence us as an industry, and especially during these very challenging times during the COVID, and the credibility they're giving to the industry, and can they sustain pushing through proposed regulations and input. So to help me analyze the impact of the industry, I have a great panel here today of experts analyzing some of these challenges. We have Nick Makar, IMO experts from Marshall Island, David Moran, discussing how some of these regulatory decisions will make some influence on strategic developments for a corporation. Semiramis Paliou, beyond being Deputy Executive Director of Diana Shipping. She's now the President of HELMEPA in Athens. And Charlie Papavizas, Senior Partner of Winston and Strawn, reflecting on some of the elements of in the US versus the rest of the world. And finally to Nick Prokopuk from DNV, also summarizing a little bit how these developments are influencing from the perspective of class. So I'm not gonna, excuse me, not gonna waste precious time. The bio of each individual are listed in the program on the website, so you can find details there. But I would like to head over the microphone to Nick, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ole, and hello to everybody that's listening, and thank you as well for the privilege to be able to speak today. I guess it goes without saying that, as you mentioned, the COVID pandemic has caused unprecedented disruption, and the IMO is no exception. But what's interesting about this is that it's also provided for a bit of a catalyst of change. And what I'd like to talk about a little bit is just how that decision-making process has been affected by recent events, but also where things may be going in the future as it relates to various regulatory developments. Of course, last year, everyone was dealing with the situation as best as possible, and it also required the IMO to essentially come to a screeching halt in terms of its workload. It was a bit interesting, though, from the standpoint that there really was no playbook for dealing with this situation, because all of the IMO's procedures and processes are predicated on face-to-face meetings. So that's necessitated an evaluation of how to work and how to come to decisions in an environment where face-to-face meetings would not be possible. So it began with, of course, extraordinary sessions of the council just to sort of clear the pathway from a procedural standpoint to enable the committees to kind of come together and figure out exactly what needs to be done, how to prioritize the meeting schedule, and how to get the meeting schedule reinstated. And essentially the way things work at the moment are virtually. It's obviously not a substitute or replacement for face-to-face meetings because of the limitations of the different virtual arrangements. But essentially, it either works through online platforms such as Zoom, or there's a platform that they've specifically contracted with to enable simultaneous translation in multiple languages, or to carry out work through correspondence. Now, while correspondence is a bit more traditional, it is very tedious and time consuming, and certainly isn't as efficient in having a robust negotiation on a complex issue. The virtual meetings themselves, they are rather limited. It's, as we all know, being familiar with getting used to sessions just like this, they can be very demanding and require a great deal of concentration. So that the first limitation really is time. It's really only limited to about 3 hours per session, which, when you consider a normal working arrangement over the course of a week, it really significantly cuts down on sort of the scope of the work. So much of what the IMO has done has been sort of streamlining its agenda, and not only looking at this in terms of the meeting schedule as a whole, but each meeting itself also evaluates its agenda and tries to make decisions on what to prioritize, and essentially which things have to be deferred. Time zones, of course, are another issue, but the virtual meeting, I think, actually tends to provide a little bit of an opportunity in that sense as well, where at a time where inclusivity in a lot of decision making is important. An example is a technical meeting that was held just a few weeks ago, which normally might only have about 40 or 50 participants in attendance. This actually had a registered participant list of over 100. So it does seem to be opening up some opportunities. But the prioritization is probably what's really most important to enable the IMO to work here. And of course, it's prioritizing by looking at procedural matters, which have to be essentially, they're routine matters or procedural matters that have to be taken in order to keep things moving, essentially, but also time critical matters. And an example of this was the last MEPC meeting last year, where the chair and the secretariat had essentially evaluated the agenda and essentially prioritized discussions on the initial strategy and the short-term measures for reducing GHG emissions, while either carrying out a number of agenda items through correspondence in advance and then just sort of procedurally acknowledging those during the virtual session, or deferring it to a future date. And this is kind of important because, again, as we know, there is probably a great deal of pressure on the IMO at the moment for maintaining its relevance as a regulatory body. And, sort of speaking within the context of this panel, we are aware of other developments that are taking place in other areas, such as the EU developments with the emissions trading scheme, and also the place of the IMO in these types of discussions, or rather the pace of the IMO discussions, which seems to be seen as a sort of inhibiting quick movement on a number of issues. I think that's probably a little bit unfair from the standpoint that what it takes to come to a consensus agreement at the IMO among the member states is really a challenge. It's ever more challenged now due to COVID, but it's really quite remarkable when you consider all of the different factors and aspects that go into a decision like that. So from the standpoint of a number of issues, especially applicable to shipping, these are mainly global issues. And this is very important for the IMO to then be able to sort of adapt to the situation and maintain its relevance, because I do strongly believe that global issues certainly require international solutions, and unfortunately a patchwork of unilateral piecemeal regulations may actually serve to be more disruptive probably in the long term. So just to quickly summarize as a way forward, I think the IMO is on pace. It is adapting well to the current circumstances. The focus being on keeping deadlines and under these new temporary arrangements. Even though 2021 is going to be primarily a year in limbo as things are still uncertain and there's still a lot of speculation, less critical issues are being deferred, of course. But importantly, I also think that the community is learning from these experiences and already looking at how some of these alternative working arrangements can be applied in the future as things begin to resume to normal. So that's it for me.
Well, thank you, Nick. Good overview of where a regulatory institution like IMO is standing at the moment. So David, how does the regulatory clouds and the ambitions of institutions like IMO affecting your input of strategic decision-making in a group like Scorpio and moving forward with, you know, like what happened in Scorpio Bulkers, for example?
Well, Ole, thank you for having me on the panel. And I think one of the things that the last 12 months has taught all of us in whatever business or industry we operate is the premium and value of certainty over uncertainty. And I think if you look at the way that particularly the equity markets have behaved over the course of the last 12 months, businesses which have clear, demonstrable secular growth and are part of the future economy have achieved an extraordinary premium and an implicitly lower cost of equity. And businesses which are challenged by the macroeconomic cycle and where there are uncertain backdrops from a regulatory perspective, but in particular, let alone an end customer, a carbon pricing angle, have suffered arguably disproportionately. So what are the impacts of that on us? Well, prior to this, it would be fair to say, as a company that has prided itself on its access to public markets and embraces the importance of institutional capital for its future development, that we were analyzing closely whether the shift of institutional capital away from the commodity value chain, and very precisely anything to do with thermal coal, was effectively a durable secular shift rather than a cyclical one. And the conclusion that we reached around this time last year was that we needed, in terms of the realpolitik of our strategy, to reconfigure it away from a volatile, unpredictable cash flow stream in dry bulk and into a much more presentable, durable cash stream from renewable energy. So we made, I think, what would be politely described, it's been slightly more fruitily described in other quarters, but a fairly radical transformation of our listed business, Scorpio Bulkers. On August the 3rd, we announced that we would be exiting our entire dry bulk fleet and refocusing the company towards wind turbine installation vessels. We made that move really, as I said, because we wanted to move from a situation where the public market was applying a penal cost of equity to our company versus private owners to a really advantageous cost of equity versus private owners. And so it was quite a considered discussion. In shipping, as we all know as a group on this panel, there's very little things you can control in your own business from time to time and day to day. The cost of capital is probably one of the most important ones that you are able to influence, and also one of the most important determinants of your long-term success. So in the first instance for us, you know, the impact of regulatory change, and the IMO is a very important part of that, but I'll come back to some specifics there, but also regulatory change around the world, moving our business in parallel with the direction of travel of our clients, of our investors, and really aligning it with the direction of global public policy was a very important and carefully thought through strategic reorientation of our company, and one which we think will pay significant dividends for our investors. The second thing I wanted to say really was that the IMO has a very difficult job to do here, a very important one, because I think we're all dependent on shipping being seen to be part of the solution that the whole world is trying to grapple with, as opposed to just part of the problem. And a lot of that rests on the IMO. But the impact of that in the near term is it's creating significant uncertainty, particularly for those who are looking to buy, finance 25-year life assets with the backdrop of an extremely dynamic, I think politely put, regulatory backdrop. Put more simply, I think the impact that we're seeing on vessel supply, and there are inputs into that, the shortage of finance being one of them, potentially sets the shipping market up for quite an interesting few years, because I think you are seeing, and we're seeing this in our tanker business, effectively a period where supply, or relevant supply for us in terms of the 15-year and younger CPP tankers, is turning negative at a time when we believe, certainly with a 24, 36-month outlook, demand will at the very least normalize and could well accelerate. So the short-term impact of this uncertainty is a really small new order fleet. And I think that does set up incumbent businesses with modern tonnage and spot exposure for quite an interesting period. The longer term impacts of it are more substantial. You know, how will we as an industry replace the fleet? What are the rules over the next 25 years that we need to play by? And I mention that more because you can see from certain Western governments in particular, you know, the UK has plans to sell no more petrol or diesel cars from 2030. It's easy for politicians to throw this out, and it's quite another thing entirely to focus on how that will actually be achievable. But certainly as someone building new tonnage in the CPP market, that is a very relevant consideration and backdrop. So I guess in summary, Ollie, because I've used a bit of time here, firstly, we've made some big strategic reorientations in our business, I think importantly. But secondly, the near-term uncertainty is gently not unhelpful to normalizing the oversupply picture that we've all seen in the shipping market over the last 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, David. Quite interesting perspective there. Semiramis, beyond being the deputy director of another big bulker company, Diana Shipping, your position as president of HELMEPA, what is an organization like HELMEPA sort of seeing in the future in terms of working with the industry, with the public, and creating some sustainability in relationship to the new regulations coming up?
Thank you, Ole. And before I begin, I would like to thank the organizing committee of the Hellenic American and Norwegian American Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to speak at this panel. It is an honor to be among such distinguished panelists and share common thoughts about changes in the shipping industry. During the past year, humanity as a whole has faced an unprecedented threat. The COVID-19 has impacted millions of people globally. As the international response continues to develop, the maritime transport and shipping industry has faced major challenges. Once again, shipping has provided and proved that it is an agile and adaptable industry, able to weather the storms. I stand here in front of you today and to share some input as the recently elected chairperson of HELMEPA, the acronym for the Hellenic Marine Environmental Protection Association, a driving force behind environmental and sustainability efforts in Greece for the last 38 years. Founded back in the early 80s, it's a non-profit organization with a pioneering vision and commitment to promote safety of life at sea and to safeguard the seas from ship-generated pollution. It's also worth mentioning that it's a United Nations accredited non-governmental organization, and as such, HELMEPA aims to support both companies and the general public to achieve a high level of environmental consciousness and also help them establish a safe and sustainable mentality for generations ahead. For 38 years and counting, we have been cultivating greener awareness and responsibility, addressing ecological issues through, just to name a few, training seminars, public awareness campaigns, and a dynamic initiative to educate the younger generations. We believe that education plays the most important role. It is through education that behavioral changes can be made, mindsets can be changed, so that the citizens of the future will have embedded in them environmental and ethical awareness, values and attitudes, skills and behaviors consistent with the sustainable development. Parallel to the above actions, HELMEPA has also supported the founding of 7 sister organizations in other parts of the world. I think all of you know very well, such as NAMEPA in North America, for example, which operate under similar declarations to that of HELMEPA. These organizations incorporate under umbrella organization INTERMEPA, which is the International Marine Environmental Protection Association, with the aim to promote effective compliance of their members with environmental legislations on the global level, as well as to educate the shipping and other marine communities to eliminate marine pollution and improve safety at sea. The world industry is increasingly embracing environmental sustainability. In September 2015, the UN's 193 member states unanimously adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including 17 goals in total, which demonstrate action towards critical areas for humanity and the planet. Hailed then as a historic agreement forging a pathway to sustainability, the 2030 Agenda has been called a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. International shipping plays a vital role in the global trade chain. Therefore, energy, efficiency, modern technology, and education could be the axis on which we can develop ideas and goals. In this context, HELMEPA, based on its fundamental pledges of promoting and encouraging international efforts towards actions against environmental pollution, can bring together the whole industry, all stakeholders in synergy, in order to work hard and achieve a safer future for generations ahead. As new greener technologies are being introduced and new fuels examined for the decarbonization of shipping, it will be the human element that will be called to implement these changes. I cannot think of a better institution than HELMEPA to help train, educate, and motivate the shipping industry through its voluntary training programs and activities that promote social responsibility and environmental awareness towards a more sustainable industry. I would like to end by encouraging each and everyone to join forces with us to identify possible initiatives that will help contribute to sustainable living and cleaner oceans and seas. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And as Vice Chairman of NAMEPA and board member, I just used to do a plug and support what you just said, that how important it is for industry members to support and to come up with, to join as members of the various MEPAs around the world to help out in educating the public. Charlie, what do you see here in the U.S. With the new administration going forward? Charlie.
Thanks, Oli. So you're going to give me 4 minutes to do the whole administration. Okay, I'll start from the top. Only in the last couple of days, the Biden administration has issued executive orders related that have some impact on maritime issues. There was a Buy America executive order which reemphasized President Biden's support for the Jones Act. And then there was an executive order on renewable energy that indicated a goal of doubling offshore renewable energy production by the year 2030. There's actually no reference point to that second objective. Doubling the 7 turbines that are in the water today, of course, would be silly. So presumably it means doubling the lease areas or doubling the permits available or something like that, all of which remains to be seen. I just want to emphasize something that David gave us an overview of, and I just want to bring it to a little more practical application. And that is, to me, the most exciting maritime market in the United States today is the offshore wind market. The market's been poised for explosive growth for a long time. As everyone on this program can imagine, over the last 4 years, that growth has been moving very slowly. We of course, had a president who believed that wind turbines cause cancer and were unsightly. So the prior administration, at a minimum, was indifferent and often hostile to offshore wind production. But there's lots of leases are out, lots of permitting processes have started, and there's every reason to believe that the next 4 years those permitting processes will speed up and that more and more towers will be put in the water. And in that connection, only in the last couple weeks, one of the impediments, regulatory impediments to offshore wind has been cleared up. In the National Defense Authorization Act enacted on January 1st over President Trump's veto, there was a provision that finally made it crystal clear that all federal laws, including the Jones Act, Internal Revenue Code, et cetera, all federal laws apply to offshore renewable energy. When Congress enacted the permission to the government to enter into lease areas for renewable energy offshore in 2005, it had left that particular aspect ambiguous. That ambiguity is gone. And now we have the opportunity, as anyone concerned about this subject and then the regulatory aspects, to get some clarity from Customs and Border Protection, Internal Revenue Service, and so on, Coast Guard, in terms of the application of a variety of laws, the Jones Act in particular. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to the 4 years of where if we had the same program 5 years from now, we would be saying, well, there's not enough vessels, there's not enough steel, there's not enough cable, there's not enough of everything that we need to build out this program of offshore wind in the United States. Happy to take questions later. Thank you, Oli.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That's interesting angle on it. Nick, what from a class perspective, just what Charlie said about the urgent need for more equipment, vessels, windmills, etc. What do you have to say?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both, David and Charlie, for really teeing it up for me here, ready to hopefully knock it out of the park. Briefly about DNV GL, you know, of course, I'm very excited to be here representing DNV GL. We are globally the world's largest and leading class society with 11,300 ships in service by gross tonnage, which is a 20% market share. We also have currently 25% of the new build market by gross tonnage in our class, globally with 12,000 employees, founded in 1846. In the United States, we were founded in 1898 with currently 2,300 employees, of which 1,200 US citizens. Now, as I mentioned, of course, my focus, and I'm very excited about this lead-in, is on offshore wind here in the United States. Globally, DNV GL has 22% of the renewable vessels in our class, and we lead both on service operation vessels and wind turbine installation vessel class. All in all, DNV GL has been in the offshore wind space for over 30 years in various capacities. But today, you know, when we talk about uncharted waters in this pandemic age, I want to talk about 3 topics that I think will resonate. Those are decarbonization, digitalization, and managing the risk of those 2 factors. If we talk about decarbonization, it's never been in higher focus. And right now, the money, both the money and political support will flow to the cleanest source of energy. The challenge for the industry is now, how do you decarbonize and do it at a lower cost and make more money while doing it? So when we look at decarbonization, we believe there's a very strong established case already for battery, hybrid applications, and even LNG fuel. And as we move towards the future, we're seeing hydrogen, ammonia fuels, synthetic diesel, synthetic LNG fuels, and likely in the future, full electric operation as well. So as the maritime and shipping industry moves to decarbonize, the offshore wind sector demands decarbonization as part of the full portfolio. Digitalization was my next topic. This pandemic has been, of course, a very rude wake-up call, a rude awakening for everyone, and it has forced everyone to deliver services in a new, different way. We live now in a digital world where everything we get is online, and the maritime industry will follow. In the maritime industry, we do have a lot of tools, but now, as a collective, we need to explore what opportunities lie in those tools and how to maximize their value. At DNV GL, we were very fortunate to start our own internal digitalization journey 5 years ago in 2015, and are very proud to date to have done 500,000 date cases, that's our technical help desk, and over 20,000 remote surveys, all of those allowing businesses to continue as normal, uninterrupted in this age. Nobody's questioning digitalization. It's a fact, it's here. Now it's accelerating the uptake of these digital tools as we are fully in the 4th industrial revolution of cyber physical systems, Internet of Things, and connectivity. And what that really means is the risk. Risk now is, the amount of data flowing around due to digitalization is now higher than ever. And the complexity of these systems is increasing exponentially. We're now in the age where a software bug, a software issue can paralyze your operations, potentially far worse than any type of other issue or mechanical failure. So This now brings the risk of what data can you trust, who owns the data, and of course the number one concern, how do you monetize this data? So the industry needs to ensure to continue operation as safe as possible. At DNV GL, we're very excited that we have our Veracity platform to help mitigate these risks and connect stakeholders. But enough from me. I welcome your questions. And lastly, very quickly, at 1:50 p.m. today, we'll have a separate breakout session, U.S. offshore wind, revolution, not evolution. I welcome your questions now and then. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we've had some questions come in, and we'll turn it over to Oli for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you. And I think that it was some interesting angles on today's topic. And I'm going to start off with one question about the order book today. There's very little ships, or very few ships ordered today, and because of the fear of what do you actually order. So, which is in one sense is good news for the industry because we're kind of in oversupplied as it is. But with all the regulatory issues looming over us and people not knowing what do we order, any advice or any outlook on that perspective from if we start with class, with DNV, what do you see sort of alternative angles owners should look at when ordering today?
Well, I thank you, Ole, for coming to me as the very first question of the day. I think, you know, like you touched on, we have today the very real scenario where, you know, a vessel that will work in the renewable space could go on charter for 10, perhaps 15 years. And that vessel could today be, with today's technology, could be outdated and perhaps even unable or unable to find work in the future terms. So I think you're seeing right now a very dynamic period where vessel owners and yards are looking at, you know, making the vessel ready for future technologies, even some that are not available yet, such as hydrogen, battery systems, synthetic fuels, and the like. It's still very unknown.
Yes, it is. There's a lot of challenge to evaluate. Charlie, from the U.S. perspective and Biden being so focused on environmental issues and the Jones Act, is there technology and input to advise shipyards and owners what to build in terms of the Jones Act?
Ole, are you kidding? If I knew the answer to that question, then I would be a ship owner and I wouldn't be a lawyer. I think what Nick said is exactly spot on, which is adaptability is the way to go. The same thing that the U.S. Navy does with its warships. You obviously can't change the hull form, but the U.S. Navy at least tries as much as possible to anticipate future weapon systems and future power systems and everything, and make the ship as compatible to those sort of things as possible. I don't think anybody can do anything else. We don't know what the Biden administration is going to do, and that's what leads to the uncertainty.
Yeah, exactly. David, in some of the previous panels, they were discussing heavily on the ESG, and you mentioned it briefly in your section here. But have you received sort of indications from investors that this is a good move? And you mentioned also environmental, the E, playing out a hard role in looking at investors' attractiveness. But what about the S and the G? Do you see any impact on that side?
Hi, Ollie. Yes, look, I think for all of us, ESG, because capital, whether it's bank capital or equity capital, and by the way, I should add, increasingly customer capital, whatever segment you are in of shipping, be it dry bulk or wet freight, the customers are increasingly focused on their own Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, and that's being driven also by their shareholders and stakeholders. So in terms of just your first part of your question, the E, I mean, I think this is a real move, and I think it's a durable and substantial one, right from the end consumer of the services that our industry provides. And yes, you're right, the S and the G are much overlooked. I think there's been a lot more focus over the last couple of years on governance. And I think that's something that the market is still coming to terms with, frankly, where it has certain blind spots. But on the S side, I think there's a lot that shipping does that it can be proud of. And you see most recently, I think, some of the comments around the hardships that seafarers have faced through the COVID process, etc. But there's a lot more that we can do. And as an industry that has a real global footprint and that provides a lot of employment to a large number of people in the developing world as well, I think the responsibility that shipping has on the S and its ability to be a sectoral leader is substantial. The one thing I'd say, just in final comment, is that this used to be something which conflicted with business success in some people's minds. These were afterthoughts. These were luxuries and indulgences that you could sort of come to when things were kind of going all right in the P&L. That's changed materially. That is now the alignment of your ESG focus with your business success, the requirement of it for business success is completely there, and I think that's not going away.
Semiramis, I know it's early stages of your task at HELMEPA, but how do you see HELMEPA can build some foundations in educating the public in terms of the S&G and relationship with the shipping companies and the investors and the end users, as David alluded to?
It's a very good question. I think HELMEPA has been doing the S part and the E part in the ESG acronyms for a number of years, for at least 38 years. And the shipping industry does realize that we are a key player in helping them educate and helping them together as partners to implement these social and environmental aspects that we need to do in order to progress. And I think the key is synergies, and we all have to see it as it's a team effort. We will not succeed if we don't work towards that as a whole, as a team.
And finally, Nick, do you think there is enough pressure on IMO especially now in the COVID times, but also to get back to finalizing a useful agenda, that there's enough pressure on IMO to fulfill the goals of 2030 and 2050?
I would tend to think so. I think from this standpoint, it's important to remember when talking about IMO's relevance that it is a specialized agency of the UN that deals specifically with international shipping and maritime related matters. Now, even before COVID, the goals and the mission of the organization, of the IMO and its membership, have always been the same, which is protection of the safety and security of the ship and its crew, as well as improving the environmental performance of international shipping. But along with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and a number of other initiatives, this of course puts the IMO mission into a much broader context, which then of course increases its exposure and its relevance in being able to contribute to not only its mission but these ancillary efforts as well. So certainly I think with those developments in mind, that there is growing pressure on the IMO to demonstrate its relevance in these initiatives.
Yeah, I agree with you that they can't afford to fall behind, because if you start getting a variety of other national and local regulation, is not good for the industry. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this panel. Thank you so much for participating. It was a good debate and good discussion on challenges the industry is faced with. So thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to go back now to another commercial from the International Registries and then into the next panel with the intro from Clay.
Adapting to change is the hallmark of quality customer service. The Marshall Islands Fleet Operations Team quickly adapted inspection procedures to ensure safe vessel operations as COVID-19 travel restrictions prevented physical inspections. Since March 25, 2020, our team has completed more than 900 remote inspections worldwide. While nothing can replace the value of physical inspections, the use of remote inspections has been a resounding success. Remote inspections have eased the burden on crew, improving the Marshall Islands Registry's engagement with ship managers, and enabled the registry to positively influence behavior regarding safety and vessel operations. Our inspectors are glad they are able to get back on board ships in those jurisdictions that allow for it, but until then, the remote inspections tools will continue to be used. As the world's leading registry, we will continue to adapt and innovate to meet global challenges, protecting the safety of cargo, vessels, crew, and the marine environment. For more information on how we've addressed the COVID-19 challenges, please visit our website at www.register-iri.com.